So let's talk about hypnosis and miracles. And this is a topic that I am incredibly enthusiastic about and interested in talking about. And Ryan has given me the opportunity to do so by asking the following question in the Client Shifts Connect group. So Ryan said, I'm curious about miracles. And he's put that in quotes there. So for instance, in the UK Hypnosis Conference, that's the UK Hypnosis Conference, there was a hypnotist that cured functional blindness where the eyes work, but the brain believes you're blind. And we know Mesmer's stories of curing a blind person. So what other known modern miracles are they, and how are there, and how do we access that potential? So I want to say something about this. I don't know about this UK Hypnosis Conference, hypnotist curing functional blindness. I do know that at the last UK Hypnosis Conference, I had a demo subject come up on stage to do some clean language work. And I said to them, is there something you'd like to make a change around? She said, I feel that there is, but I don't know what it is. Now, using clean language, I said, so you feel that there is, but you don't know what it is. And when you feel that there is, whereabouts do you feel that? And she was looking over to her left and said, there's something over there. And we ended up working with that. And we actually have a recording of that. I think Ruckus is cleaning up the audio on it. Now, I got a message about a week later from this person saying, look, I know you didn't know what we were working on, but it came to her at the time, and it was dyslexia. And she went on to describe her lifelong dyslexia, how it had gotten in the way of everything, that she had to read everything 3 times to make sense of it. And basically, she'd walked out of that session, looked around the hotel and could read everything perfectly. And that had been the case for about a week at the point that she contacted me. She said, I've tried to put it back as it was, but I can just read everything perfectly first time. So to me, that was a miracle. Because number one, I didn't know what I was working with. And I'm glad I didn't know what I was working with, because I wouldn't want my pre-existing ideas about what's possible or what's not to have got in the way of that. And I think the fact that they were able to stay out of the way was an incredible value there. But to me, that was a miracle, because if somebody had said to me before, James, do you think that you could do anything about dyslexia with hypnosis? I'd have said maybe we could teach the NLP reading strategy. Maybe that would help. But in terms of something like that, to me, that was miraculous, because I don't believe that we merely stumbled across the correct strategy for fixing a problem. We moved the right things in the right way. I think there's something more than that going on. Okay? And I think this is hugely relevant, particularly when looked at in the context of hypnosis since the days of Mesmer, which Ryan has mentioned in this article. So I just want to say what I mean by a miracle. For me, a miracle is anything that occurs where we cannot make a connection. We can't explain it. It's an unexplained change. We might be able to come up with a theory, but it is generally unexplained. And I actually think that miracles happen in Changework quite a lot more often than people think, because I think a lot of the time, the miracles that can happen, quote unquote miracle, that can happen as a result of a process, we think we have an explanation for, but I don't think that that's usually right, or I think it's often not correct. One example of this is I use eye movement stuff with people all the time. I've seen it make miraculous instant shifts with people. And for other people with a similar kind of issue and a similar sort of structure to it, make no difference whatsoever when used on multiple rounds, right? I've seen this happen, and I'm just using eye movement as an example. I could use many other processes as an example. So, whilst people might have theories about what's going on with eye movement-based stuff, I actually wonder to what degree that's really so, and to what degree it maybe has almost nothing to do with the eye movement, and everything to do with something else that we cannot fully explain as yet. Now, Erickson would explain this stuff, and maybe a lot of old school hypnotists would explain this stuff of the unconscious mind does miracles, basically. It does things. It has capabilities that we are unaware of, that we think sit often in the realm of impossibility. Now, Of course, one person's impossibility is another person's. Of course, that's possible. And I want to reference something here. I want to reference the book Healing Beyond Pills and Potions by Steve Bierman, MD. So Steve Bierman, he wrote this book, I think in about 2000. It's about 6 years old. And it's a fantastic book. My friend Jürgen Rasmussen put me on to this. But Steve Bierman, he worked for 20 years in an ER department, or an A&E department if you're here in the UK. And he was using hypnotic suggestion work every day in the ER department. Okay. And he also later on went into a kind of medical hypnosis practice and started doing hypnotic trance work-based stuff for all sorts of medical conditions. This is his thing, medical conditions, apparently physiological conditions. And Steve Bierman talks about doing things routinely on a daily basis that for some people would be miracles and would be miraculous. I am going to read a little excerpt from his book here. And he says this: anxiety and bleeding. Most nights around 7 p.m., a patient arrives in the emergency department with pulsatile bleeding from a finger laceration. The story goes as follows. The patient was washing/drying a glass after dinner and it broke, cutting the finger and slicing through a small digital artery. Direct pressure has been applied, often for an hour or more, but to no avail. Hence the emergency department visit. As a young physician, I would often introduce myself to such a patient and say, "I'm sorry, I can't get to your wound quite yet. As you can probably see, we have some pressing emergencies right now. However, I see that you've lost a lot of blood, so I've asked the technician to apply a pressure dressing. Just know, as soon as I can return, I'll be back to take care of you." I would say this in full earnest and with real compassion. Not bad, really. Compassionate, but those words do nothing to stop the bleeding and alleviate a little anxiety. So, I'm turning the page. He goes on to say, later in my career, I learned to say, you must have been a bit worried, weren't you, over that bleeding? Thus pacing their fears in the past. There's a past tense move there, which is a common suggestion maneuver from neurolinguistics or NLP. And yet, I'm going to ask you to do something, and I'm sure you'll think I'm kidding, but I'm not. I really do mean it. And you might even want to laugh a little. But, and this is sinking my breathing to theirs, exuding earnest, I need you to stop bleeding now. My tone certain, our eyes locked, my head gently nodding. Odd as it may sound, and I know it does sound odd at first, but virtually all patients respond as follows. Firstly, they chuckle timidly, as predicted, and then, perceiving my earnest, they hush, and finally they watch in amazement as the bleeding, beat by beat, first slows, and then, seconds later, stops. That's right, I affirm confidently. Then turning to the technician, please dress the wound. I'll be back shortly to close it properly. So, I really like this example because it's sort of every day, or it's certainly every day for him. He's literally saying this happens almost every day. You'll get a laceration coming like this. And it is something that most people think is impossible. How could it be that something like bleeding could respond to words, to suggestion? We don't know the answer. There's something called information transduction, which looks at how information can move from one form to another. So we'd have to assume that there would be a process of information transduction from the words and the verbal and non-verbal communication that Steve Bierman's engaging in there, down to something deep in the physiology. There's a physiological response, but a specific physiological response. Is it really true that our physiology speaks English and can understand things and respond? That doesn't seem plausible. It seems more plausible that there's some kind of chain of information transduction from one form to another. However, I have been a teacher of hypnosis for, I would say, what is it now? crikey, it's a long time. For 16, 17 years or more, I've been a teacher of hypnosis. And I had an interest in hypnosis, initially, particularly conversational hypnosis. I was very interested in that for a long time and had no interest in trance work. And my book came out, around the topic, or before that, my blog, Hypnosis Without Trance. So I'm the Hypnosis Without Trance guy, a suggestionist. My definition of hypnosis back then, and it largely stands now, as the use of language and communication to direct attention, lead cognition, and seed ideas for the purpose of leading someone into an altered experience of reality. That's my old definition of hypnosis, and that's how for the longest time I saw it. We were changing people's experience of reality, right? I don't say for the purpose of altering reality. I say altering people's experience of reality. Now, I do think that is largely and mostly what we're doing with hypnosis. But in that instance, Steve Bierman is going beyond that. He is not altering somebody's experience. He's not having them feel better about the bleeding. He's having the bleeding stop. How does that work? Now, the teacher of hypnosis, I remember somebody being in a workshop of mine, probably in around about 2013, I'm guessing. And all of a sudden, she burst into tears, this workshop attendee, and she rushed out of the class. And I said, "Excuse me," and I paused the sort of class, and I went on after to see what had happened and if she was all right. And I said, "Are you okay? What's happened?" And she said, "You don't even believe in hypnosis," she said to me. She was very upset and accused me of not believing in hypnosis. And I was like, "Oh, well, that's kind of curious, because I do. I just believe it is something particular." And she, I think what she was upset about is not that I didn't believe in hypnosis, but I think it was that I didn't believe that hypnosis was capable of the things that she believed hypnosis was capable of, right? So in that sense, she was right. I didn't believe in her version of hypnosis. And there was a particular version of hypnosis that I had rejected quite early on, when I first formally was trained in NLP and some formal trance work and stuff like that. And one of the ideas I never liked the NLP 6-step reframe back in the day. I thought it was absurd. I thought it was ludicrous. And what struck me as absurd, I used to call it the genie in the bottle model of hypnosis. I'd say, is it really true that we've got this genie sat in the bottle that can do miracles, but is just waiting around and letting people suffer with their problems because somebody called a hypnotist hasn't bothered to show up and tell them to get to work yet, right? It seemed like a credulous idea to me, right? It seemed ludicrous. It seemed ridiculous. So I kind of dismissed it, and I got into quite a technical approach, and that was good. I don't regret that. But I'm not so sure now. And I'm not so sure because of things like what Steve Bierman's talking about, or the sort of dyslexia piece, right? And even something like, I'm going to share something now, it's a little part of me that's slightly embarrassed to share this. One of the kind of classic things that hypnosis is supposed to be able to do that I always doubted it could do is get rid of warts, right? I've read this countless times over the years that you get rid of warts. And I always thought, that's probably a fairy tale, a pipe dream, something like that. I doubt it. But for about 20 years, I had on my foot a huge verruca that would not go. I mean huge, I mean size of a penny huge. And it just wouldn't shift. And it had been treated with, various verruca treatments and, attempted to be frozen off and all of this stuff. And nothing had ever worked to shift this verruca, right? And then this is relatively recently, just about 6 weeks ago, I pointed at it and did a deal with my unconscious mind to activate the part of me that knew how to get rid of it. That's all I did. It's gone now, right? It's gone. And to me, there's a part of me that's going, and maybe that's a coincidence, but maybe not. These things seem to happen. Now, Ryan has mentioned mesmer. There are many stories of mesmer. There's a story of mesmer curing functional blindness. There's stories of James Braid doing so from the 1850s. James Braid figured out how to do hypnosis by watching a couple of demonstrations from, I think it was La Fontaine, the mesmerist, and saying, well, I don't think it's mesmerism, but I do think it works, and here's what it is. James Braid was a physician, and he used to treat people with what he called doses of hypnotism. And because he was a physician, he kept quite good records of the people he worked with and the cases he worked with. People that had been failed by regular medicine, which actually at the time was pretty abysmal, and they were probably being harmed by more than helped by, that he would get incredible results with. Not every time, but he would get incredible results with using what he called doses of hypnotism. He didn't give suggestions. He just put people into a state of what he would call neurohypnosis or neurohypnotism. And he put people in this state and leave them. And they would get these often quite miraculous cures, things that we would consider to be impossible. So, I've got this sort of thought brewing in my mind. It's been coming for some months now. Is what if our unconscious mind, if you like, our inner mind, our deeper mind, what if there is an intelligence within us that is just simply capable of doing things that we don't realize we're capable of? And this indeed, in the Client Shifts group, I posted a question without any context some time back. I'm scrolling down right now to see if I can find it. I can't see it. The question was, what is it that you would like to do that you believe you cannot do? And of course, everybody took it to mean doing on a kind of, well, I'd like to go and achieve this in the world or that in the world. But really what I was thinking about is, what is everything that we can do deeply and unconsciously that we don't realize that we can do? Like stopping blood, you're stopping bleeding happening on command, like perhaps also having something that seems like it has only a physiological origin, something like warts or a verruca or something like that, both of which are caused by variants on HPV, or at least that is in the mix of causes. But what else is there? What is what is our body and our system capable of doing with that is different? So these days, I'm like, wow, what if it is that just simple? What if it is just that simple? Steve Bierman's saying, I need you to start bleeding now. He's setting it up in a right way. He's got authority in the moment. He has his whole framework that he talks about in his book, which is based around authority. And I think there's some significance in that. But he's just asking the person to do a thing that they don't know they can do, and they're doing it. So that's really interesting to me. So what do you make of that? I don't know. I don't know the mechanism. I don't know. It seems like it's something to do with some sort of information transduction, so it can move from linguistic suggestion and maybe nonverbal suggestion down to quite specific responses. I don't think there's any way, because we're dealing with unknown unknowns, we're dealing with unknown interdependencies in doing this. I don't think there's any way we can make it so we can guarantee it will always happen. And I think we get back to setting the conditions. I believe this is a huge thing about hypnosis and hypnotism. And I did have this written up on my board, but my daughter had a party and she's wiped off my whiteboard. So I was talking about how hypnosis is about setting conditions much of the time, setting an environment that permits something to happen. We cannot make that thing to happen. There's an old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. I think from a hypnosis perspective, we can lead the client to miracles, but we cannot make them, drink the water of miracles. We can lead them to, but we cannot make them drink. But I think there's a lot more possible than we might realize. And I think the more that we open ourselves to that possibility, the more interesting things we can do. I think the challenge, perhaps, with hypnosis work and taking on miracle work is framing it for a client, particularly if you're going to get paid for it, right? If you're not going to get paid, if you're just curious about what's possible, you sit down with somebody who's maybe, been diagnosed with a serious illness and you think maybe we can do something about this with hypnosis. Now, Steve Bierman, by the way, he's absolutely clear. He never advocates hypnosis as a replacement for anything. He uses it as an adjunct. but he still has many examples of many things that people would call miracles. He's worked with a lot of people with diagnosis of cancer, terminal cancer, where he's done hypnotic work and got very, very rapid remission and disappearance of tumors above and beyond what's expected. Again, he doesn't claim an absolute. There's not a, every time I do this, this happens. It's, I do this a lot, but this often happens. That's the thing about hypnotic work. It's never every time I do this, this happens. And this is my argument, by the way, because there are many hypnotists out there who do absolutely not only believe in miracles, but claim to be able to get those miracles to happen each and every time they do it, right? And this is never so. This is never so. Anybody who's claiming I get 100% miracle success rate, they're not telling the truth, right? And they may not be telling the truth to themselves. I'm not saying that they're deceiving others. They may be deceiving themselves, because we cannot make miracles happen. But miracles can happen, and we can be very much open to it, and we can set the conditions and optimize the conditions, I think, for them to happen. And I really believe this is so. As I say, the trouble comes about is if you were going to get paid as a Miracles on Demand service, you wouldn't be able to guarantee the miracles, right? So what do you do when you do that kind of work? There's ways, I think, of framing it where you're very honest, that there's a good chance you can make a really big difference, and you're curious to find out what's possible. I think that's what Erickson was saying when he said, I don't know, but I am curious to find out what's possible for you. It's really optimizing the conditions for miracles without making a claim that it will happen in a rigid sense. You know, and I don't think Mesmer ever would have made those claims, right? I don't think Esdale would never have made those claims. Esdale's an interesting guy, James Esdale, who did all these surgeries, hundreds of surgeries, under mesmeric influence. He would mesmerize people that did not speak the same language as him. It was all non-verbal mesmerism. He did all these surgeries. You know, he wouldn't claim every single time that he's hidden that, but a lot of the time he was. And he had a deep belief in it as well. Those people didn't know they were going to get mesmerized either. They didn't even know they were going to get surgery. The way you couldn't do this now from an ethics perspective. You could not replicate what Esdale did from an ethics perspective. People would come in for surgery, but he wouldn't let them know they were going to get surgery. They would come in, he would mesmerize them or get his team to mesmerize them. He didn't even do the mesmerizing himself or the magnetizing. And then once they were in the appropriate state, he would go and do the surgery without telling them that he was going to do it. And they didn't leap up and go, oh my goodness me, what are you doing? They remained in the state, and he did the surgery. One of the things that Esdale also pointed out was he got this very rapid healing. Like what he found is the people he'd done the mesmeric treatments with, not only were they, the way he would talk about it, was insensible to pain while he did the surgeries, they would have a way, way more rapid healing response after the surgeries and have way less blood loss during the surgeries than people that he didn't do the mesmerizing with, or people put them before he was doing the mesmerizing. So anyway, to sum up, I don't know what's possible, but I am now in a different place from where I was when that lady ran out of my workshop and said, you don't even believe in hypnosis. I've seen all sorts of things happen that are miraculous. Even, even for some people, this would be miraculous. I've seen the rapid relief and release of PTSD symptoms, very serious, very heavy PTSD symptoms, in an intervention that took minutes, right? Literally minutes, not 15 minutes. I'm talking a minute, 2 minutes, right? And it wasn't that. I'm thinking of one particular person who had such a dramatic response to the work that I did. Everything disappeared in minutes, and they had a very serious PTSD response. The method that I've used for many people, and it's often quite good. That particular instance, it was really incredible. And I just don't think it was because it was the special technique. Something else happened there, something deeper. And I can only say that it was, of course I participated in that. Of course I must have done a good job setting it up, engaging the guy, having him be as he needed to be in that moment and open to a possibility in a way that was incredibly useful. But in the end, whatever change happened at a deep level and was mediated by something that was beyond my control and beyond his control, right? But was a kind of personal ally. So this is what Erickson was talking about when he talks about the unconscious mind and the power of the unconscious mind, right? So in the end, that old idea, that genie in the bottle of the unconscious mind that I've rejected, I'm now happy to accept as a functional, holistic, I suppose, explanation. Of course, we have a black box. Of course, you have an unknowable, interdependencies going on in the whatever kind of information transduction process is happening. But there are too many cases of these things in various, reports and documentation, in the experience of myself even, and other people as well. There's too many of these things to just dismiss them. We can't fully explain them, right? And we can come up with explanations, but they're probably not it. So for me, yeah, miracles can happen. The more you open to it as well, the more they happen, I think. So yeah, that's just my take where I'm at right now. It might be different again in 6 months.